Tom said. But you can't. It wasn't him that killed those sheep. It couldn't have been. Sam's not a sheep killer. He's been around sheep all his life. He wouldn't kill them. It was the lion. It must have been. That was no lion I saw out there this afternoon, Tom. It was Sam. He killed those sheep, and when he comes back, he'll have to go. That's all there is to it. It's not fair, said Tom, trying not to cry. It's not fair. Sam didn't do it. I know he didn't. And what's more, I'll prove it. And he shrugged on his coat again and ran out of the door. His mother called after him to come back, but he ignored her. He ran down across the meadow behind the house and jumped the stream at the bottom. There were no sheep left in the field. His father must have brought them in for safety. But halfway up the hill, he saw the wool on the ground where the lambs must have been killed. From the wool, there was a trail of blood on the grass that led up to the fence and into the thick oak wood beyond. He stopped at the edge of the wood and called out, "Sam! Sam!" And he put his fingers into his teeth and whistled. The valley echoed, but there was no answering bark. He crawled under the fence and made his way into the wood. Every now and then he stopped to call out for Sam, but all he ever heard was the hoot of an owl, and once the cry of a startled pheasant. It was getting dark now, but he ran deeper and deeper into the trees until at last he could see the other side of the wood and the open moor beyond. He stood still so he could listen. "Sam! Sam!" he called out. And suddenly, from only a few feet away, he heard a rustle of leaves and a faint whimper. He found Sam lying at the foot of a tree. There was a gash on his front leg and one of his paws was covered in blood. He was panting hard, his pink tongue lolling out of his mouth. He looked very tired and weak. "You all right, Sam?" said Tom, kneeling down beside him and stroking his head. "Where have you been, Sam? What have you been up to? I bet I know how you got that cut. You stood up to that lion, didn't you? Not afraid of anything, are you? Not even a lion?" He looked closer at the wound. "It's not too deep, Sam. You're lucky to be alive, you know that. I can't take you to the vet and I can't take you home either. Just have to look after you myself. If I tell them you're only trying to look after the sheep, just doing your job, they wouldn't believe me. If I tell them you chased away a lion, they wouldn't believe me. See, Sam, they think it was you that killed those lambs. That's why Dad fired that shot at you. But I expect you know that already. You're not stupid, are you? I'll have to find somewhere secret, somewhere safe for you to stay till they find out it wasn't you that did it." He picked Sam up and carried him down to the stream. He sat down beside him and washed the leg until all the blood was gone. Sam kept looking over his shoulder and whining. Tom thought it was the wound that must be hurting him and washed it more gently. "Got to keep it clean," he said, sitting back on his heels. I've got it, he said. "There's one place where they'll never find you. Ghost Cottage, that old ruined cottage on the other side of the wood. Father keeps a few tools in there and some hay, but no one ever goes there in winter. You'll be all right, Sam. You'll be all right. As soon as I've found that lion and taken a photo of it, then they'll all know it wasn't you that killed those lambs, and you'll be able to come home again. But I've got to find that lion first, haven't I, Sam? And he's out there somewhere on the moor. I know he is. You chased him out there, didn't you?" Tom never looked up into the great oak tree above his head. If he had, he would have seen the mountain lion stretched out along a branch watching him. He was tired and hungry. He'd never even had time to eat the lambs he'd killed before that dog was on him. He'd tried to fight him off, but the dog was too fierce for him. He'd tried to outrun him, but the dog was too quick for him. There was only one thing he could do: climb a tree and hide. He was still hungry, but at least he was safe. Chapter 4. Sam was lying on the bed of hay which Tom had spread out for him in a corner of the room. The rest of Ghost Cottage was full of hay bales stacked to the ceiling. "You've got the whole cottage to yourself," said Tom. "There'll be a few mice and rats around, but you like a good rat chase anyway, don't you? You'll be warm enough here, and I'll be back tomorrow with some food after I get back from school. I'll bring some water too to wash that cut of yours. And remember, not a bark out of you, not a whimper. You understand?" Sam seemed to, for his head was on one side, his ears pricked and listening. "If Dad finds you here, you're done for, you know that, don't you?" Tom crouched down beside Sam and scratched him behind the ears where he liked it. "Night, Sam. Be good. See you tomorrow then." The next morning, Tom sat by himself in the front of the bus, as far away from everyone as he could. He wondered if Claire Newman had forgotten about the meat and the camera, but he need not have worried. As he got out of the bus, she was waiting for him, and they went off together around the back of the bicycle shed so they could talk without being overheard. "You got it?" he asked, and she smiled and patted her satchel. "Beef scraps," she said, "and I've got my camera too, all in here. Did you see him again?" "No," said Tom, "but he's done what you said he would. He's gone and killed 3 of my dad's lambs, and he told Claire all about Sam and how he'd found him lying hurt in the woods. Dad thinks Sam did it, and if he finds him, it's going to have him put to sleep. But he won't find him, because I've hidden him somewhere safe. Somewhere they won't find him, but we've got to prove it was a lion that did it, Claire. I can't keep Sam hidden forever. We've got to find that lion, we've got to." "He'd come for the meat," Claire said. "You'll see. Where are you going to put it?" "Haven't thought really," Tom said. "He was heading off down through the woods towards the moor after he killed the lambs. Sam must have been following him, and that's where I found him, down by the stream. If the lion's been there once, he might come back again, I suppose." "That's as good a place as any," Claire said. "Perhaps he'll come back to drink there." "He's got to drink. You've got to put the meat right by the stream, somewhere where it's muddy." "Why?" "Footprints," said Claire. "You've got to be sure it's him taking the meat, haven't you? I mean, it could be a buzzard or a fox or a crow or anything. I looked it up in the book, and I've done a tracing of a mountain lion's footprint. It's in the camera case." She checked to see that no one was looking, and then took out the bag of meat and the camera and stuffed it down the bottom of Tom's bag. "Can you bring some more tomorrow?" Tom asked. "He may not come for it first time." "I'll bring some every day until he does," Claire said. "Father won't miss it. It's only scraps, goes into sausages anyway. And he likes sausage meat, doesn't he?" She turned to go. "I'm glad you gave Barry what for yesterday. I'd have done it myself, only I'm a bit small. He's always on about my glasses and about how small I am. Good luck." And she was gone. Tom wondered why he never talked to her much before. Perhaps it was because she was always reading. "She's the first girl I've ever really liked," Tom thought. All day, Tom could think of nothing but Sam and the lion. He got 2 detentions for not paying attention, but he didn't mind. That afternoon, as soon as he got off the bus, he raced off down across the farm to Ghost Cottage. Sam was waiting by the door as he opened it. He jumped up at him, licking Tom's face and nose and ears until he found something more interesting in Tom's bag. Tom scooped out a handful of meat scraps and fed them to the dog bit by bit. "It's not really for you," he said, "but she's put plenty in here. The rest for the lion. Just got to get 1 photograph of him, and I can take you home again. I want to see their faces, Sam, when they see it really was a lion." Sam seemed a lot stronger now, although he was limping on his bad leg. Tom spent as long as he could with Sam, cleaning the cut again and talking to him. Sam whimpered a bit as he left, but when Tom stole back to the window to make sure he was all right, Sam had his nose in the hay bale sniffing out mice and rats, and he seemed quite happy. "Bit late back, aren't you, Tom?" said his mother. "Bus was late," Tom said, and he felt his father look at him sharply. "Funny," he said. "Thought I heard it go by the end of the lane some time ago. You've been off looking for Sam, haven't you? Look at your shoes, they're covered in mud." "All right, so I did," Tom shouted. "And when I do find him, I'll take him away from here and never come back. I won't let you put him to sleep, Dad. I won't let you." He was sent to his room without any tea, but he knew he'd be called down just as soon as his father had gone out to milk the cows. "You must be more reasonable," said his mother. "Your dad's only doing what's right. You can't have a sheep killer for a sheepdog, you know that much." "Sam didn't kill the sheep. I told you that, Mum. It was the lion." His mother shook her head. "I just don't understand it when you go on and on with such a ridiculous story." "It's true, Mum," said Tom. His mother shrugged her shoulders. "Just eat your baked beans, Tom, and let's not talk about it any more," she said. That night, he waited in bed until he was quite sure everyone in the house was asleep. Within a few minutes, he was dressed in all his warm clothes and putting on his boots and coat by the back door. He had Claire's camera around his neck. It was bitterly cold outside as he made his way down across the field towards the wood. There was one bright star and a half moon that lit up the night. Once inside the wood, he trod carefully, trying not to rustle the leaves. It was a silent night except for the rush of the stream and a pair of owls calling to each other across the valley. Tom made his way along the stream to the spot in the wood where he had found Sam the day before. He soon found the perfect place for the meet. On the near side of the stream was a muddy beach, and just above it the stump of an old tree. To reach the tree stump, the lion would have to put a foot in the mud. He left the meat in a pile on the tree stump and sat down behind the trunk of a tree some distance away and waited. Within half an hour, his feet were freezing and he could no longer feel his thumbs, but he stayed there, his camera at the ready. The hours passed and nothing came. He longed to curl up on the ground and go to sleep, but he forced himself to stay awake. All night long he sat there until the first grey light of dawn came up over the moor. Before he left, he searched the mud around the tree stump for any footprints, but there were none. "I know you're there. I'm leaving some behind for you," he called out. "The rest's for Sam." Above him, the mountain lion lay in his tree and watched the boy scoop the meat into his coat pocket. He waited until Tom had gone before letting himself down and bounding over to the tree stump. He wolfed down the meat and licked the tree stump clean. Tom stayed with Sam in the cottage that morning as long as he could. He watched him eat and then lay down beside him in the hay. He cuddled up close to him to get warm. "Here comes Sam. He's got to come. I'm going to spend every night down by that stream till he does. Don't care how long it takes." He crawled into bed when he got home. That was where his mother found him, fast asleep when she came to wake him. In fact, he was so difficult to wake that he almost missed the school bus. Every day after that, Claire brought meat to school, and every night Tom put the meat out on the tree stump for the lion and waited. One night, a family of squabbling badgers ate the lot while Tom looked on, and once a fox came padding across the stream and helped himself. But no lion came, and what's more, Tom never found a print in the mud that even looked like the drawing Claire had given him. He began to lose heart. Maybe, he thought, maybe they're right after all. Maybe I imagined everything. He wasn't to know that every night he spent in the wood he was being watched from the branches high up in the tree above him. He wasn't to know that the lion waited every night till Tom had gone before he came down the tree for his meat. And the lion never put a foot on the mud. He didn't have to. He leapt from the grass bank onto the tree stump with no effort at all. After a week, Tom was tired out. He kept falling asleep in lessons, and Mr. Morgan told him not to watch television so late. His mother thought he was sickening for something and wanted to keep him away from school. Normally, there was nothing that Tom would have liked better, but now Tom needed his supply of lion meat, and school was the only place he could get it. He had to go to school. Claire would be there waiting for him in the playground every morning. "Any luck?" she'd ask. "No," he said, "nothing." "He'll come," she would say. "He's hungry. He'll smell the meat. He'll come, you'll see." And that was all Tom wanted to hear. But when he did come at last, one cold and windy night, Tom was fast asleep. He never heard the lion spring out of his tree. He never heard him come right up to where he lay, curled up amongst the leaves. The lion sniffed at the boy's face and then walked away towards a tree stump to eat his meat. It was only because a piece of the meat fell into the stream and the lion went splashing in after it that Tom woke. Up until that moment, Tom had never been frightened of the idea of meeting the lion. But now he found himself only a few paces from him, and he could see just how huge and powerful the creature was. He was suddenly stiff with fear. The boy and the lion looked at each other for a few moments, and then the lion settled down to his feast again. Tom got to his feet as slowly as he could. He remembered the camera and the picture he had waited all this time to take, but he had only one thought in his head now: to run. He backed away from the lion, never taking his eyes off him, and then turned and ran. He never saw the root that tripped him up. Lights flashed in his head as it hit the side of a tree trunk, and then he knew nothing more. When he woke, he felt something heavy pinning him to the ground. He opened his eyes slowly. A giant paw was resting on his chest, and the lion's eyes were peering into his. Chapter 5. At first, Tom thought he was having a bad dream. Everyone knows the only way to end a bad dream is to wake up. So he tried to wake up and found he couldn't. It was only when the lion began to lick his neck that he was sure it was no dream. The lion's breath was hot on his face, and its tongue was exploring the back of his ear. It felt like warm, wet sandpaper. Tom closed his eyes and waited to be eaten. At least, he thought, when they find what's left of me, they'll know I was telling the truth. They'll know I wasn't making it all up. When the lion began to lick his chin and then his nose, it was more than Tom could stand, and he put out a hand and tried to push him away. To his surprise, the lion at once stopped licking him and then sat back and yawned. In the light of the moon, Tom noticed something glinting around the lion's neck. He sat up to get a closer look. It was a large silver disc attached to a broad leather collar, and he could see there were letters on it. Slowly, Tom reached out his hand, and as he did so, the lion rolled onto his back, just as Sam did whenever he wanted to be petted. Tom propped himself up on one elbow and began to stroke his tummy. The lion wriggled and squirmed with pleasure as Tom's hand moved up to tickle him under the chin. This lion is no man-eater, Tom thought. He likes me. His fur was thick and warm. Then, before Tom knew it, two front paws were round his neck and pulling him downwards on top of the lion. Then the licking began all over again, and that was when the lion began to purr, a deep, roaring purr. Tom was close enough to read the writing on the disc now. It read, Leo, telephone Moortown 723. 8. Until dawn, the boy and the lion wrestled and rolled together amongst the dead leaves. They played by the stream and ran up the hillside onto the moor. By now, Tom thought of the lion as no more than a large cat. He could feel the great strength of him, but he knew he was quite safe. They liked each other, and they trusted each other. They sat side by side now, looking out across the moor at a rabbit cropping the grass. Suddenly, the lion was gone. He leapt the stream and was bounding up the hillside. The startled rabbit bolted into a hole in the hedge, and the lion trotted back across the stream, up the mud beach, and sat down again to clean his dirty paws. "Not very good at hunting, are you?" Tom said. "You're supposed to creep up, not go charging in like the cavalry. But then you're not a wild lion at all, are you? You're just a soppy old pussycat. Well, I can't leave you out here, 'cause all you could catch are sheep, and you've had a few of my dad's already, haven't you? Anyway, that name on the collar means you belong to someone, doesn't it?" The lion licked his whiskers and looked out for more rabbits. "What am I going to do with you?" said Tom, putting an arm round the lion's neck. "That's what I'd like to know. If I go back home and tell them you're out here, they won't believe me. And even if they did, they'd just hunt you down and shoot you. And I don't want that to happen." Tom thought for a moment. "Only one thing to do. I've got to take you back where you belong. That phone number on your collar should help. We'll go and see Claire. She'll know what to do. She always knows what to do. The problem is, how am I going to get you there? Don't suppose you'll come when you're called like Sam, will you? What I need is a lead." He fished around in his coat pocket to see if there was a piece of string in there, but there wasn't. And then he noticed the camera lying in amongst the leaves at the foot of a tree. "Must have come off my neck when I tripped," he said. He picked it up and opened the case. "Be your fault if it's broken," he said. "How was I to know you were an old softy? You don't look like it, you know." The camera was not broken, and Tom was just putting it back in its case when he thought of the strap. It was a long one, and it was leather, just what he was looking for. "Don't know if you're trained to go on a lead," he said, slipping the strap through the lion's collar, "but we'll soon find out." To begin with, the lion sat like a rock and looked at him. Nothing Tom did would budge him. He tried sweet-talking him and bribing him with the last of the meat scraps. He tried brute strength, tugging and heaving with all his might. "Come on, Leo," he said. "You've got to come. It'll be all right, honest. I won't let them hurt you." And he pulled again and again, but it was no good. The lion yawned and lay down, head between his paws. But Tom had one more idea to try. "All right then, if that's how you feel, I'll leave you here, see if I care." And he dropped the lead and walked away. He had not gone more than 50 yards before he heard the leaves rustling behind him. He turned round to see the lion bounding after him. "Thought you'd come," Tom said, picking up the lead. "Don't want to be left alone, do you? Come on now, we've got to find Claire, and we haven't got much time. And there's a few people I want you to meet as well. I know you're just a soppy old date, but they don't. I want you to look as fierce as you can. Look hungry. Leo, show them your teeth." And Tom chuckled at the thought of taking the lion with him into school. "Of course, I don't want you to eat them. Not even Barry," he said. "Don't suppose he'd taste very nice anyway. I just want you to frighten them, that's all." And the lion padded along beside him, out of the wood and up over the fields towards the town. Tom's mother went to wake him up at 7 o'clock as usual. His bed was empty. That did not surprise her. Tom often went and made himself a cup of tea if he woke up early. But when she came down to get breakfast ready, she saw the back door was open. That did not surprise her either. Tom's father was always leaving the door open when he went out milking. But as she was closing it, she noticed that Tom's boots and coat were not there. She called out around the house. "Perhaps he's gone off milking with his father," she thought. So she hurried down the path to the dairy, still in her slippers. Tom wasn't there. I'm looking for Tom, she said. Tom's father shook his head. Haven't been here, he said. Expect he's off looking for that dog of his. Hardly seen that boy since the dog went off. Give him a shout. He'll be about somewhere. I've been shouting, said Tom's mother, and he hasn't answered. He hasn't come back. He's not here. You think something's wrong, don't you? Tom's father said. She nodded. I'm worried, she said. He's not been himself ever since Christmas. I'll finish this cow and I'll come, Tom's father said. He'll be about somewhere. They searched the farm together, every building and barn, but there was no sign of Tom. They climbed the haystacks and lofts and ran out across the fields, calling for him. They looked along the banks of the stream and combed the wood from end to end. Only Ghost Cottage left to check, said Tom's father as they came out of the bottom of the wood. If he's not there, then we'll have to call the police. As they came to the door of the cottage, they could hear Sam whimpering and whining inside. Tom's father opened the door and the dog bounded out. He tried to catch him, but the dog was past them in a flash and returning off into the woods. They followed him, shouting for him to come back, but Sam was on the scent of the lion and nothing would stop him. The dog ran as far as the stream, nose to the ground. Once there, he sniffed furiously in the leaves. Then his hackles rose and he barked an angry, rasping bark. When they caught up with him, at last they found the giant footprints in the mud by the stream, where Tom had been playing with the lion only an hour or two before. They were too big for a dog, too big for a fox, and too big for a badger. Tom's parents looked at each other. Both of them knew what it was. It's Tom's lion, isn't it? Said Tom's mother, crouching down. Tom's footprints were there too, and that's Tom's Wellington, isn't it? Looks like his size, says Tom's father, and I wouldn't believe him. I wouldn't even listen to him. Now God knows what's happened. I'll never forgive myself, never. In the half light of the early winter morning, Tom hurried on towards the town. He knew the countryside like the back of his hand. He crossed roads only when he was sure he wouldn't be seen and stayed well out of sight of the houses and cottages. The lion loped along beside him, and he never once tried to break away. The town was waking up by the time he got there. Lights were on in the houses everywhere, and there were already a few cars out on the roads. Tom sat down with the lion under a hedgerow and wondered how he could get to Claire's house without being seen. Can't go up the main street, he said. Too many people about. Can't risk it. We'll have to go round the back. Thing is, I've never been round the back of her house. Don't even know if she's got a garden. Still, I know where the shop is, and I know she lives there. The butcher's shop is painted pink on the front, so it will probably be the same on the back. We'll find it. Tom found the house easily enough, for as he crept along the fence behind the houses, he saw the butcher's van parked outside. Written on the side, he read, J. Newman, Butchers of Quality. The lion smelt the van all over, and it was all Tom could do to haul him away. They opened the back gate and ran across the little lawn past a swing and a sandpit to the lighted kitchen window. Claire was eating her cornflakes at the table, and her mother was peering into the toaster by the oven. Tom tapped on the window, but Claire was reading the back of the cornflakes packet and did not even look up. He knocked again, a little louder this time, and Claire's mother turned around. Tom ducked down and held his breath. He heard talking inside. Suddenly, the lion was up on his back legs and peering in at the window. Tom tried to pull him down, but he would not come. Then the door opened. It was Claire who came out, not her mother. She had her glasses in her hand. She looked at the lion and then put her glasses on and looked at the lion again. You found him then? Mum would have had 50 fits if she'd seen that, she said. The lion hissed at her and backed away. It's all right, Claire said. I won't hurt you. Mum's gone upstairs, Tom. I'm supposed to be watching the toast. I haven't got much time. He's tame, Tom said. Just like a big pussycat he is. Of course he is, else you'd be dead, wouldn't you? She said. thought you said they didn't kill people, Tom said. They don't, except when they've got nothing else to eat, Claire said. What's that thing round his neck? She came slowly towards the lion, her hand held out. Tom felt the lion stiffen beside him and then relax as Claire crouched down and tickled him behind the ears. It's his name, and I think it's a phone number too, Tom said. Leo, Claire read out. That's lion in Latin. She stood up. Soon as I've finished my breakfast and Mum's gone out to work, I'll phone up Moortown 728, wherever that is, and I'll tell them to come and fetch him. Right? All right, said Tom. But first, I'm going to take him to school to show everyone I was telling the truth. And then we'll take him to that rotten police station. And that's why I'm leaving it for today.